We saw earlier how many of our biggest developers legally shifted assets to their spouses in the months before NAMA was set up. Despite the construction crash, many are still afloat. But could some of our biggest ones be keeping their heads over water only because we're paying them rent? This time last year, the public learned that Jerry Gannon had won a lucrative storage contract for the National Museum, netting him an average €1 million rent a year in his storage plant in Swords until 2030. At least €20 million. But he's not alone. Take Treasury. Johnny Ronan and Richard Barrett have built on their Irish operations to turn Treasury Holdings into a world player. Its main interests are now listed on the Singapore Stock Exchange. Its Treasury Buildings is now this one in Shanghai. But here, €1.4 billion losses on its recent developments have landed it in NAMA. But Treasury is all right. In Ireland, it's a big landlord, and we're paying it a steady rent. It's April the 8th, 2009, the day after an emergency budget brought news that NAMA was to be set up to take toxic loans off the banks. Inside the new agency's HQ in Treasury Building, the Minister for Finance is still insisting it's no bailout.
I really do appeal to individuals in our public life to desist from the temptation of using this bailout language.
Outside, a chauffeur-driven Maybach, starting price €600,000, is competing for the camera's attention. The landlord has arrived.
This is about bailing out the Irish economy. This is about ensuring that businesses and individuals who cannot access credit can access credit.
Johnny Ronan and Richard Barrett's Treasury Holdings own the Treasury Building. It's home to NAMA and the National Treasury Management Agency, which leases it from Treasury. Last year's rent, €1.75 million. Since the lease began, over €15 million. Through NAMA, the taxpayer is paying rent to Treasury Holdings, which in turn owes €1.4 billion in loans to NAMA, loans now being guaranteed by the taxpayer. Down in Spencer Dock, Treasury is also landlord to the central bank itself, who rent office space in this building. A 25-year lease signed in July 2008 as commercial property prices tumbled. The central bank says it cannot be cancelled. It nets Treasury rent of €2.3 million a year, over €57 million in the lifetime of the lease. But just up the road, none can compare with the jewel in the crown of Treasury's Irish interests, launched in September.
How are you? Good to see you again. Congratulations after all these years. Teacher, how are you? Good to see you. Congratulations.
Sorry.
Yeah, thank you.
We got there eventually. Kevin, remember?
All is well. My name is Craig Doyle and I'm delighted to welcome you all here to the launch of the Convention Centre.
By the launch, our public spending watchdog, the Controller and Auditor General, had already highlighted a report that found its costs likely to outweigh its economic benefit. But Treasury was hosting a big party to celebrate its winning streak.
So it does indeed give me great pleasure today as teacher to officially open the Convention Centre in Dublin.
At a total cost, all in, of €712 million. From just the 3 buildings we focused on, Treasury Holdings are making over €50 million a year from state leases. But it also rents and leases to banks now largely owned by us, like AIB, Anglo-Irish Private, Bank of Ireland, and state agencies like Foss on Bagot Street, the Irish Blood Transfusion Board, Dublin City Council, to name but a few.
still not right.
Great to see.
You had situations where you had developers who would say that they had the personal mobile number of ministers and they wore this as a badge of honour, and vice versa.
When you were an insider, you had access to politicians. So, for example, early on in the crisis, Paddy went to meet Brian Lenihan to discuss personally with him how serious the crisis was. This would be in early 2008. So we had access to politicians. I don't think they were listening.
The biggest NAMA developers are all quids in. Almost all of them lease property to the state that we pay for.
Some of these buildings.
In Dublin alone, for just 4 Dole offices, the state pays companies controlled by top developers Bernard McNamara, Liam Carroll and the Cosgrave brothers almost €5 million a year. Dole claimants sign on in offices owned by a new welfare elite.